All right, let's dive in. This deep dive is going to be fascinating. We're looking at Joe Biden's presidency, as he's leaving office. And you've given us a ton of material to work with.
Yeah.
We got opinion pieces, economic analysis, even polling data. It really gives us like a 360-degree view of how people are seeing his time as president right now.
Yeah, I think intriguing is a good word to describe what we've got.
Oh, definitely. Because there's some real head-scratchers in here. It's almost like we're dealing with two completely different versions of reality. Like, on one hand,
right,
the U.S. economy did really well under Biden. I mean, low unemployment, a booming stock market, the whole 9 yards. That Financial Times article laid it all out. Even quoted Mark Zandi saying Biden left behind an exceptionally strong economy, especially since he had to deal with that COVID-battered one when he first took over.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
But then you look at that University of Michigan survey you sent over, and it's like a totally different story. Americans across all income levels, they felt like they weren't any better off than they were 4 years ago. Like he flunked the Reagan test, that whole, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago thing.
Yeah.
So how do we square that? Objectively, the economy is doing well, but people just don't feel it.
Right.
Was it just like a messaging problem?
Well, messaging definitely played a role, but I think it goes deeper than that.
Okay.
The problem is that all that economic growth didn't actually translate into real noticeable benefits for a lot of people.
Of course, like the benefits weren't trickling down.
Exactly. I mean, let's not forget about inflation.
Oh, right.
Even though wages were going up, prices were rising even faster. So even if you got a raise, you might still be struggling to afford the basics like groceries and gas.
Yeah.
And that really eats away at any sense of economic progress, especially for those lower income households.
That makes total sense. That briefing document you sent, it even criticizes how Biden's team talked about inflation.
Really?
Yeah, they said that the administration was too focused on like the technical rate of inflation instead of like how it was actually impacting people.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there's this quote in that Newsweek article from Kerry Cogliani's.
Oh, yeah, he's a regulatory policy expert.
Right. He says, it's not enough for the administration to simply point to favorable numbers. The president's team needs to figure out how to make people feel that progress in their daily lives.
He's got a point.
Yeah. It's almost like they needed to translate all those economic figures into something that people could connect with.
Yeah.
Like, hey, remember those crazy high grocery bills last year? Well, because of this policy, they're starting to come down.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that kind of messaging probably would have resonated a lot more.
Right.
But it was sadly largely missing.
Yeah.
And that lack of connection really fueled the dissatisfaction with Biden's presidency overall.
Okay, so we've got inflation really muddying the waters. But there were also some, major events during Biden's presidency that probably really shaped how people saw him.
Oh, absolutely.
Events that, honestly, I don't think any amount of positive economic news could outweigh.
No, I don't think so either.
Like right away, the Afghanistan withdrawal comes to mind.
Oh, yeah.
It was chaotic, to put it mildly. I mean, those images from the Kabul airport bombing.
It was rough.
Really shook people's confidence in his leadership.
Yeah. Newsweek even called it a defining moment of his presidency.
Oh, wow.
And the CNN poll showed a huge drop in his approval rating for foreign policy after that.
Yeah, it makes sense.
It does.
And then there's the issue of illegal border crossings.
Yeah.
Another supercharged topic.
For sure.
It seemed to generate a lot of negative attention.
It definitely gave his opponents a lot to criticize, although it is important to remember that, according to the briefing document, those numbers actually went down by the end of his term.
Huh. Interesting.
But, that initial surge in those images of overcrowded facilities really created this perception of crisis.
Yeah.
And sadly, those perceptions often have more weight than the actual facts, especially in politics.
So true. It's all about how things look, not necessarily how they actually are.
Unfortunately, yeah. And that leads us to some of the tougher criticisms of Biden, especially his choice to run for re-election. Despite his age and those already low approval ratings, there's that quote from David Axelrod.
Oh, yeah, Obama's former strategist.
Right. Yeah. He called it a terrible, terrible mistake.
Wow.
But, maybe Biden felt like he had to run again, like it was his duty to keep Trump from winning.
Yeah, maybe.
But Axelrod and others said it was a risky move that might have hurt the Democrats in the long run.
Like he was risking too much.
Exactly.
Wow.
Especially since people were already worried about whether he was up to the job. The briefing document mentioned how his debate performance really didn't help.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
It kind of solidified those fears, you know?
Yeah.
And then there are the criticisms of Merrick Garland about how slowly things were moving with the Trump prosecutions. Newsweek even suggested that this might have actually helped Trump win in 2024.
Wow. So it's complicated, right?
It really is.
I've got real economic progress, but people feeling worse off.
Yeah.
And then you add in those big missteps.
It's a mixed bag for sure.
It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, how do we actually measure how successful a president is? Is it just about the economy or is it something more?
Yeah, like, is it about connecting with people, inspiring confidence, showing real leadership during tough times?
Exactly.
But can any president do all of that? Balance all those things and still be popular?
That's the age-old question, isn't it? And it's super relevant as we start to look at how Biden's presidency will be remembered.
All right, well, let's get into that. What's the verdict? What do the polls and surveys tell us about his legacy?
Well, the CNN poll results are pretty eye-opening.
Correct.
Only 36% of Americans approve of the job Biden did. That ties his all-time low.
Yikes.
Even among Democrats, his approval has taken a hit.
That's really saying something.
It is, and it really highlights this sense of disillusionment, you know? It seems like no matter what he accomplished policy-wise or how the economy improved, the negative things and this overall feeling of unease just kind of overshadowed it all.
Yeah, it's like all those accomplishments got lost in the noise.
Exactly. But, you know, as we go deeper into these sources, it becomes clear that there's also this feeling of missed opportunities that runs through his presidency.
Missed opportunities? What do you mean?
Well, think back to when Biden first came into office.
Okay.
He was all about unity and healing.
Oh, yeah.
Moving on from the chaos of the Trump years, there was this wave of optimism.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It was almost like a collective sigh of relief.
Exactly.
After all that tension and drama.
Precisely. But then things started to unravel. The pandemic dragged on, inflation skyrocketed, and then the Afghanistan withdrawal. Well, we've already talked about how that went down. And that unity just vanished.
So it's like that window of opportunity closed. Are you saying that even beyond those big problems, there were specific things where Biden could use that momentum but didn't?
Yes. And several sources point to exactly that. One example that comes up again and again is the Build Back Better plan.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It felt like a huge GE deal at the time.
It was supposed to tackle climate change, childcare, so many big issues.
Yeah, but it didn't exactly go as planned, did it?
It was whittled down and then got stuck in Congress, never really recovered. And not delivering on such a big promise just added to that sense of disappointment, especially among progressives who had high hopes for Biden.
It sounds a bit like overpromising and underdelivering, wouldn't you say?
To a certain degree, yes. But it's not that simple. The sources also talk about the tough political situation Biden was dealing with. A slim Democratic majority in the Senate, strong opposition from Republicans.
Right, so it's not like he just wasn't trying hard enough.
Exactly. But even when he did get some wins, like the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act, there's this argument that his team didn't really explain these policies to everyday Americans in a way they could understand.
So they were doing stuff, but no one really knew about it or felt the impact.
Pretty much. They talked in this language of, you know, abstract economic numbers.
Yeah.
Instead of making it relatable, making people feel like their lives were actually getting better.
Huh. It seems like that disconnect between reality and how people perceive things is a recurring theme with Biden.
You're absolutely right. And it really highlights a core challenge for any leader.
Yeah.
How do you translate complicated policies into something that people connect with? Something that makes them feel like their lives are actually improving.
Right. It's not enough just to do the work. You have to make people feel the positive effects.
Exactly. And that's where Biden seemed to struggle. The sources point to this lack of clear, consistent messaging.
Yeah.
Like a failure to really connect with voters who were dealing with inflation and feeling uncertain about the future.
And wouldn't you say that that void, that lack of connection, gave someone like Trump a perfect opening?
Absolutely. And that brings us to another big piece of this deep dive. The undeniable role Trump played in shaping the narrative around Biden's presidency.
Yeah, it's impossible to talk about one without the other.
Right.
Trump being such a constant presence, always in the news.
Yeah.
It made it really tough for Biden to, just DO his job.
Absolutely. The sources highlight how Trump's constant presence, his attacks on Bayer, his ability to dominate headlines, all contributed to the sense that Biden was always playing defense.
Yeah, like he was constantly reacting to Trump's latest move or statement.
Exactly.
Instead of setting his own agenda.
You got it. And that constant need to respond to counter Trump's narratives probably kept Biden from fully focusing on articulating his own vision for the country.
It's wild. Trump wasn't even in office, but his influence was still huge.
He really did cast a long shadow. He still controlled the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And he never stopped attacking Biden, questioning his legitimacy, sowing doubts about the election.
And you're saying that this constant barrage, on top of Biden's own missteps, ultimately led to his downfall.
Well, the CNN poll found that most Americans think Biden's failures were mostly due to his own actions and leadership, not things outside his control.
So people were looking for someone to blame.
Yeah.
And Trump was happy to point the finger at Biden.
It seems that way. And the sources paint a pretty grim picture of the political landscape right now. Voters are more divided than ever, disillusioned with the status quo, and receptive to Trump's style of populism.
It's kind of a scary thought. Does this mean American democracy is in trouble?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it comes up in these sources a lot. We're seeing this erosion of trust.
Yeah.
The rise of misinformation, the growing divide between parties.
Yeah, it feels like the very foundations of our political system are being tested.
They are, and we don't know how it's going to turn out. But one thing is clear from these sources.
What's that?
Biden's presidency, for all its accomplishments, just couldn't turn those trends around.
That's a tough pill to swallow. But maybe by understanding why Biden struggled, we can figure out how to deal with these challenges in the future.
That's the hope. As Winston Churchill said, the farther backward you can look, the farther forward you are likely to see.
That's a great quote. Reminds us that history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the present.
Right.
And using it to shape the future.
Exactly. And when it comes to Biden's presidency, there are important lessons to be learned about the power of perception, the importance of clear communication, and just how fragile unity can be in a country as divided as ours.
Lessons we should all pay attention to. Okay, so we've talked about the economic reality, the political missteps, Trump's constant presence. But there's one more piece we need to look at. Biden's legacy.
You're right. And as we'll see, it's a legacy that's still being written.
Okay.
A legacy that could be reassessed, but also one with some very real limitations.
Okay, I'm ready for the final chapter of this deep dive.
Right.
What will history say about Joe Biden and his time as president?
It's a complicated story for sure.
Yeah.
You know, looking ahead, though, it seems like this might not be the final word on Biden.
What do you mean?
Well, these sources we're looking at, they hint that history might have a different take.
Interesting.
It's tricky, you know, analyzing a presidency that's just ended.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We're still so close to everything, emotions are running high, and it's tough to see the big picture.
Right, like we're still in the thick of it.
Exactly. But when we step back, you know, look at the long-term effects of some of his policies, things might look different.
You're talking about those long-term economic plans we mentioned before?
Yes. The ones that haven't really shown their full impact yet.
Okay, yeah, I'm following you.
It's like, think of it this way. Biden was playing the long game. He was focused on those fundamental things that don't give you instant results.
Right.
But they have the potential to create lasting change.
I see what you mean.
Investments in infrastructure, clean energy, American manufacturing, these things take time.
It's like planting a tree, right? You don't get shade right away, but you're creating something that'll benefit people for generations.
Exactly. That's a perfect analogy. And several sources suggest that some of Biden's big wins, like the Inflation Reduction Act and the CTABS Act, might not be fully appreciated for years.
Maybe even decades.
Maybe even decades. But at the time, remember, those policies didn't really connect with people.
Yeah, it was all about those immediate struggles.
Right.
Inflation, the shaky economy.
Right. Those long-term benefits felt, well, too far off.
Right, like something abstract and way in the future.
Exactly. But as those investments grow, as those factories start humming and those green energy jobs appear, the economy could look completely different.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
And that could change how people see Biden's role in making it all happen.
So you're saying that future historians might look back and say, hey, Biden was actually ahead of his time.
It's definitely possible. Ian Shepherdson, the Economist, even predicted that the balance will shift in favor of Biden as the memory of the inflation shock fades.
Interesting.
He thinks those industrial policies will have a huge, lasting impact.
Okay.
Ultimately creating a more resilient and sustainable economy.
That's a compelling argument. But there's a snag, right? Politics moves fast.
It does.
Voters usually care about what's happening right now.
Of course.
Not some maybe future.
That's true.
So a president can set things up for long-term success.
Right.
But if they don't handle those immediate problems, history might not be kind to them.
It's a delicate balance. And for Biden, it looks like those immediate challenges weighed more heavily.
Yeah, that seems to be the story so far.
But even with those struggles, there are signs that those long-term policies could actually work.
Really? Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, the sources talk about this huge surge in private investment after the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act passed.
Oh.
Billions of dollars went into clean energy, semiconductor manufacturing, other key areas.
So it's like those policies started a chain reaction.
Exactly.
Stimulating the economy and paving the way for future growth.
Exactly. And the White House estimates that those investments could create millions of jobs down the line, revive struggling areas, and make America more competitive globally.
Wow, that's pretty optimistic.
It's promising, for sure. But yeah, it's still theoretical.
Right. We have to wait and see.
That's what's exciting. We get to watch it all unfold. It's like a live experiment in economic policy. And how a president's legacy is shaped. Will those investments live up to the hype?
Yeah.
Will they change how people see Biden? It's a question for the history books.
Talk about a cliffhanger.
Right.
But it fits, doesn't it?
It does.
Because Biden's story isn't over yet. These sources gave us a glimpse of how his presidency looks now. But that view can change as those long-term policies start to show results.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's not just about understanding what happened. It's about wrestling with the unknown of the future. Will Biden be remembered as a visionary leader who set America up for a more prosperous, sustainable future? Or will those achievements be forgotten because of all the problems and missteps that happened during his time in office?
That's a debate that'll probably go on for years.
Probably.
But one thing's for sure. Biden's presidency, with all its ups and downs, big goals, and missed chances, gives us a really fascinating look at how complex leadership is, how quickly public opinion can shift, and the lasting power of legacy.
You said it perfectly. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. It's been great exploring these sources with you, unraveling this multi-layered story of Biden's presidency.
It has.
I hope you've gained some insights, some things to think about, maybe even a new understanding of just how complicated American politics really is.
It's definitely been a wild ride, full of twists and turns and lots of eye-opening moments.
It has.
And who knows, maybe years from now we'll revisit this topic and see how things have changed.
That would be interesting.
Until then, thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The economy, the missteps, Trump's influence, it's a lot.
It is. It is.
But it sounds like, based on these sources, that Biden's legacy might be more complicated than just, failure.
Right. There's more to the story, for sure.
Like what? What else is there?
Well, it seems like a big part of it comes down to these long-term policies he put in place, these investments that might take a while to really show results.
Oh, yeah, those ones we talked about earlier, the ones that people didn't really notice at the time.
Yeah, exactly. It's like he was playing the long game, He was focused on laying the groundwork, building a foundation, but those kinds of changes, they don't happen overnight.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like you plant a seed, you got to wait for it to grow.
Precisely. And several of these sources suggest that it's those very policies, the ones that didn't grab headlines, that might actually end up defining his presidency.
Really? Like which ones specifically?
Well, the Inflation Reduction Act, for one, the CHIPS Act, those are biggies. It's just that their full impact, it might not be out for years, maybe even decades.
So you're saying that people might look back at Biden's presidency in like 20 years and have a completely different view?
It's entirely possible. I mean, think about it. At the time those policies were passed, it was all about the here and now. Inflation was soaring, people were struggling, the future felt uncertain.
Right, so those long-term benefits, they just felt too far off.
They did. But as those investments mature, as we see more green energy jobs, a more robust American manufacturing sector, the economic landscape could shift dramatically.
Okay, so maybe, just maybe, Biden was ahead of his time.
Maybe so. There's a quote from Ian Shepherdson, an economist, who said that the balance will shift in favor of Biden as the memory of the inflation shock fades.
Interesting.
He believes that those industrial policies will have a profound impact, ultimately creating a stronger, more sustainable economy.
Okay, that's hopeful. But here's the thing. Politics isn't exactly known for patience.
True, very true.
Voters want to see results now, not in some distant future.
That's the nature of the beast, unfortunately.
So even if a president sets the stage for long-term prosperity, if they don't address the immediate problems people are facing, they might still go down in history as a failure.
It's a tough tightrope to walk, and in Biden's case, it seems like those immediate challenges, they really weighed him down.
They did. But you said earlier that there are some signs those long-term policies might actually pan out.
Oh, absolutely. For example, several sources point to the huge surge in private investment after the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHES Act were passed.
Okay, yeah, I remember hearing about that.
Billions of dollars poured into clean energy projects, semiconductor manufacturing, all sorts of key areas.
So those policies sparked a wave of investment and set the wheels in motion for future growth.
That's the idea. And the White House estimates that those investments could lead to millions of new jobs, revitalized communities, and a stronger position for America in the global economy.
Well, that sounds promising.
Yeah.
But it is still just a prediction.
Right. We have to wait and see how it all plays out. But that's what makes it so fascinating. We get to watch it happen in real time.
Yeah.
It's like a giant experiment in economic policy and presidential legacy. Will those investments live up to the hype?
Yeah, will they?
Will they change how history views Biden? It's a question for the future.
A question for the future. I like that. So it sounds like the jury's still out on Biden's presidency.
I would say so, yes.
We've got these glimpses of how people see him now, but that could change dramatically as those long-term policies start to show results.
Exactly. It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just about looking back. It's about understanding that the story is still being written.
And maybe even about how we as voters think about presidential success. It is all about what happens right now, or do we need to take a longer view, consider the impact that policies might have years down the road?
That's a crucial question, and one that we all need to ponder. Biden's presidency, with all its complexities, offers a valuable lesson in that regard.
Yeah, it really highlights the importance of thinking beyond the immediate, of considering the potential long-term consequences of our choices.
Precisely. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
We have. It's been quite a journey. We've gone from economic data to political missteps to the long shadow of Trump, and finally to this open question of Biden's legacy.
It's been a fascinating exploration, and I hope it's given our listeners a more nuanced understanding of this pivotal moment in American history.
Me too. It's a reminder that politics is rarely simple, and that the story is never truly over. Who knows what twists and turns lie ahead?
Who knows indeed?
But one thing's for sure, we'll be here to break it all down for you. Until next time, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.